Hello and welcome to this week's edition of 50 Years Serving the Island, a series of programmes showcasing highlights from Manx Radio's archives during the station's first 5 decades serving the public in the Isle of Man. In 1968, Manx Radio was transferred into public ownership and became the island's public service broadcaster. Today, a special edition of Perspective featuring memories of the Battle of Dunkirk. Presented by John Moss, it was compiled in 2004 to mark the 64th anniversary of the battle.
64 years ago today, a call went out to civilians in England to provide all shallow draft vessels of 30 to 100 feet to cross the English Channel and go to a place called Dunkirk. Between May the 27th, 1940 and June the 4th, a total of 693 ships, 39 destroyers, 36 minesweepers, 77 trawlers, 26 yachts and a variety of other small craft brought back to England 338,226 people. All heavy equipment was abandoned and left in France. Amongst the number of the British Expeditionary Force retreating across France to the coast were Manx soldiers. These are their recollections of the miracle of Dunkirk.
We blew a couple of bridges at a canal near the La Panne area, set some booby traps, because we discovered them. We weren't fighting the rearguard action. We were on our way out, and to our surprise, a dispatch rider came up and he said, do you know there's little boats waiting for you in a place called La Panne? And we wouldn't believe him. And then that night we got orders to do a force march into this perimeter for Dunkirk and La Panne area, because the Belgians had packed in and the French had packed in, and we'd been caught in a pocket, and that was a very small pocket.
We found 3 horses. We took them to be French artillery horses, because even in 1939 the French had horse-drawn trucks, and some of their artillery was horse-drawn, and they were just wandering about, so we collected them and we rode for a certain distance, but not for long. It wasn't very, very comfortable.
We did know that we were going to abandon the vehicles, but we didn't want to set them on fire or anything like that, but just to decommission them, which we did by undoing the sump plugs, letting the oil run out and starting the motors. The noise was very eerie because we had nothing else to do but just lie on our backs and listen to this horrible screeching noise of all these vehicles, and one after the other made more of a banshee shriek and seized. But we still couldn't make out what. We couldn't believe that the great BEF had been routed, and that's what it turned out.
Approaching Dunkirk, when there were thousands of us, it was just a case of survival. We'd already had an order from our regimental colonel, more or less every man for himself. But that didn't mean that we vanished or split up. We all kept together.
We arrived like La Panne, which is looking across, say, Michael to Peel. Dunkirk was a massive smoke and flames, and the Dunkirk pier had gone. And I saw the Iron Man boat, recognised the Iron Man boat burning just off Dunkirk pier, the Mona's Queen. And there's several ships, all sorts of little ketches, little sailing craft, little cruisers, some only carrying about 15 or 20 men, all coming in. Fortunately, the weather was excellent. It was flat calm. Apart from that, I don't think they would have got anybody off.
Eventually, we gets down to Dunkirk, Well, it was a bit of a shambles at Dunkirk. Everything was burning. The ruin was absolutely out of this. You just couldn't imagine it. Of course, it was commonplace later during the war, in the blitzes. But as I say, everything was smashed up and burning, and there were people and soldiers and what have you all lying dead in the streets and so on. And we went down towards the pier, and we thought, oh, they say you get taken off, but by the time we reached the end of the pier, there were officers there, and they said, who are you, where are you from, what units, all right. The mole itself had been badly bombed. There were vessels lying alongside of it, and I believe that's where the Fenella was sunk. So one of the vessels was probably the Fenella. But we carried on, and it would be like walking along, we'll say, Douglas Promenade, leaving the pier and walking towards Onkenhead, and then you got more towards the country. And nothing but sand dunes. Wherever you looked, it was sand, just like being down at Derby. But eventually, we came to a little place called Bray Dunes, which was a suburb of La Panne. And they just directed you down off the main road onto the sand, and they said, now you wait there with your officers and so on. And we waited there. We were there for 2 days.
Approaching Dunkirk, of course, we saw lots of bodies, civilians, troops having been shot down by the German Luftwaffe, coming over, firing at random on anybody. In one shed, I saw a stack of bodies piled up, just carried off the road and hidden in a shed. And when onto the beach, we were absolutely exhausted and only too glad to have a lie down, having tramped about 16 miles.
We met up with red caps, and they were coming, and they were saying, when they stopped, what have you got in your lorry? Oh, uniforms, sandbags, petrol, ammunition. Oh, right, ammunition. You go that way, petrol, you go that way, uniforms, anything like that. You go that way, drive it into the field, and collect your kit and your rifle, and just leave me lorry. You can't have your lorry, just do as you're told. Leave it in the field and it'll be attended to. And apparently what they were doing, lorries like that, full of stuff that was useless for the carrying on of the war, from our point of view, they just blew them up and smashed them up and set fire to them. But if you had ammunition, petrol, and anything useful, you went another way.
We could hear the gunfire behind us on the outskirts. We could hear the German planes, of course, right round us. Bombs we could hear being dropped. But the British Defence Regiment were, of course, protecting us, a rear guard action they were. And there was no, should I say, panic. Not panic. We were just hoping. In fact, so much so, and I don't mind saying this, that on the beach at Dunkirk, I actually prayed. I don't say I learned how to pray, but I certainly prayed most sincerely that we would get away and see our families again.
We're told to have a look around, keep out of sight if you could, at daytime, of course. But we went around to see if there was anything going in the way of eats. The town was absolutely devastated. And various places, and there had been no clearing of, only the military dead had been cleared and were put in a certain order. but the civilian dead, which was quite considerable. By this time, someone had rustled a bit of food of some sort up, the usual bully beef and stuff like that, and biscuits. So we prepared for a night on the sand.
And we were amazed when we got to Dunkirk beach. There were masses of troops, all lined up except they were waiting for the bus. And we were at the beach. It's like from Derby down to Peel, apart from the fact that at the back there was large sand dunes. So during the daylight, you were getting Stukas having a go, Stuka bombs, dive bombing. So we were sorting ourselves out and going for the sand dunes in between the bombing raids. Then you were lined up again and hoping that the next boat in would be yours.
And they kept us working. Lorries that had been brought in or come in unofficially, they were they had the canvas stripped off the framework, and they were driven out end to end into the sea, and then planks of wood lashed across the top, and when the tide came in they were getting wounded off on those. It was a kind of a makeshift pier, and they were loaded into small boats. It was very, very clear, the sky, and the horizon was clear against the sea. You could see silhouettes, but men were going off during the night, and the idea was when the tide was out, you marched down, and you would get into small boats or whatever there was, and when the tide came back in again, well, you had to come back in, and you rested in the sand dunes. And of course the bombers and planes, they were coming in and bombing and machine gunning.
Well, when I got out on deck, the whole town was lit up. It was so clear, apart from the men on the beaches, the little craft going in, chugging out. Took 2 or 3 destroyers, I can't remember how many, standing by to take passengers from the small boats. The whole town was lit up, fires here and there. Obviously, there had been a raid earlier.
On the beach, well, we first loaded up. The beach was knots of soldiers all amongst the sand dunes. And bombs, of course, were getting dropped on them. It was German aircraft. We could see tanks firing way back, 5 or so miles back. And we were wondering where our own planes were at the time.
After about 3 or 4 days on the beach, we kept ourselves going by helping any wounded we could find, looking for something to eat, looking for water, and of course looking for the inevitable cigarette. During the day, you were just looking out for the dive bombing. During the night, you crept up into the sand dunes for a rest. The usual banter was there. I think the only thing that keeps you going is there's always that certain camaraderie and spirit that keeps the boys going. And even going out, rowing out to this boat to come away, some wag was shouting any more for the sky like trips around the bay.
Snoozing, smoking cigarettes, thank goodness I don't smoke now, telling stories, arguing. It was just one monotonous spell. And when nightfall came and the clouds came over, I recall lying on the beach, tin helmet under my head, under my neck, and clouds were all over the channel, which was a blessing for us. And somewhere in the early hours of the morning, a breeze got up. A breeze came up over the channel, blew over the channel, and the clouds began to waft away. And there was the moon, a brilliant moon shining there down on us.
You're listening to 50 Years Serving the Island, a series showcasing highlights from the Manx Radio archives from the station's first 5 decades as the Isle of Man's public service broadcaster. Today, a special edition of Perspective compiled in 2004 to mark the 64th anniversary of the Battle of Dunkirk.
All these troops were coming down the mole, which is often forgotten. You see, all the concentration and all the television you've seen, there's been the poor troops on the beaches, and they had a hell of a time. They had a terrible time, admittedly. But there were thousands of others who never got that far and who came down. This mole was their only hope. Mole is a wooden pier. And the point is that the blessed thing was only about 9 or 10 feet wide. And there were no proper bollards, anything to moor by. And if you managed to scrape your way in, well, then was the problem, depending on the state of the tide, how to get gangways out, because simply wasn't a room for a big long gangways. You just had to have a short gangway, and sometimes just virtually standing up straight. Some of these poor devils were in such a bad shape that one had to go down, jump down, and help them up the gangway.
The first ones were bad. They were quite jocular about it. Some of them thought the war was over, actually, you know. And one chap gave me his revolver. He said, "This will come in handy for you." But the second lot were more bedraggled, of course, and they were glad to see us, actually.
Well, it got to be, it got past being frightened. You just accepted everything. You got hardened to it, really. You do. Someone will come along and say, "Did you know so-and-so helicopter?" And you just give a nod, and that was it. You never thought it was going to be you, anyway.
I can recall one of the OABs saying, "Oh, they were born." You'll always get a Job's comforter on a ship. They were born together, and they'll die together. You see, but there we were, a sitting duck on the sandbank, and a poor old skipper was kicking the engines astern. And it seemed an eternity, but in retrospect, we were only ashore for about 20 minutes or so. It was not one of my most happy experiences at Dunkirk.
Well, we walked up the mole and up onto the mole on a sloping causeway. At the top of it was two MPs standing there, tin hats on, and you could tell they were MPs by the red on the tin hats. And they drew their revolver and they said, "You can't go here, you can't pass this way unless you somehow or other get rid of these vehicles that had been abandoned by the people that had just dropped them wherever they were and run for the boats." And the reason for this, he said, was that there is a hospital ship coming in and he wouldn't be able to stay very long, and they wanted a rush job to get these chaps aboard and stretcher cases aboard and get out again before the tide fell or the enemy came, which we did. But Mr. Nicholson, Tommy Nicholson and myself, we attended to the vehicles, to the motorcycles, whilst the ordinary drivers just pushed them into the harbour, what we would call the harbour here, out of the road, and thereby making a free way for the stretcher bearers to load up their lads onto them.
I've never heard such a male voice choir of all hideous sounds. The White Cliffs of Dover. Our favourite was "We'll Meet Again." We don't know where, we don't know so-and-so when, but I know we'll so-and-so meet again some sunny day. All that kept us going, talking about our families and so forth. But it passed the time on, and we eventually made for the ships, climbed on. Another man from the Isle of Man climbed aboard with me, even though we were in a Yorkshire regiment. Another man from Douglas climbed on board with me, and between us we had 1 tin of bully beef, which is corned beef today, and we broke that tin open and his words to me were, Sarge, Sarge, do you think we will ever see our Isle of Man again? I said, of course we will, and when we do, we'll meet in the Castle Mona.
I was on board the Mona's Queen on the 29th of May 1940 when she was making her third run into Dunkirk, and I was asleep, watched below. Anyway, the bomb apparently struck her approximately midships, and then there was 2 lifeboats, one on each side, one to port, one to starboard, the forward boats, and they were on their outriders, with the result that these 2 boats somehow or other, I don't know, I couldn't say, got disengaged and were in the water. So when the bomb struck and the explosion took place, I got out smartly out, I was blown out of bed and dashed up the companionway and died over the side. I got hold of a fellow by the name of Harry Gale, he's dead and come now, and pulled him into the boat, and I pulled Tom Castaigne into the boat, and also Harry Crane.
As we drew near, we saw the Fenella line there. This is on the outward side of the mole, on the outward side of the mole, and it was dead low water. And we crept in, and we could see that she was sitting on the bottom, and there wasn't a sign of life on her. It was an uncanny feeling, and it really unnerved some of the poor old. You remember that you had men there that weren't trained, never heard a shot fired in anger in their lives, and weren't trained to war. Old fellows from Glen May and Peel and Craignish and Ramsey.
Eventually, we got off in a small rowing boat, but there were too many of us on it, and it turned over. We couldn't right it, so we were paddling about on a plank, 3 or 4 of us, paddling with our hands, and eventually we transferred onto a pontoon, and then from a pontoon we were picked up by a large rowing boat, a longboat.
From the sea, it was one mass of gradually, slowly moving personnel, troops, of course.
And down came the French troops, and I can still see the old general in charge. He had a big, I don't know whether you've ever seen a picture of it, Otto von Bismarck, the Prussian Chancellor. Well, it reminded me of something from the Franco-Prussian War, big beard and very dignified. And he made his troops march down. And some of ours were down the mole and marching. They were running and getting the best way they could. Wasn't anything else for it there. But he was determined he was going to go out with dignity. And we got them aboard. And as soon as they got aboard, that was a real show of force marching down. As soon as they got aboard, they collapsed in a heap. They were absolutely whacked.
When we got on board this naval boat, they issued us with a mug of cocoa, laced with rum, and a piece of bread with cheese, and I think the bread had been either fallen in or buttered with paraffin oil. Most revolting stuff I've ever had in my life.
And we rowed ourselves out to a Dutch freighter called the Dromedary. And we got away on her at daylight and got to Margate on the Sunday morning, June the 4th.
To look then, when we got onto the ship, and to look ahead of us and see that wonderful sight, the white cliffs of Dover, which meant that we were coming home.
We were all up on the rail as if we were going on a trip round the island, and looking back, it was just a pile of smoke and fire. And he was still having to go at the Stukas, having to go at this half channel coming back. So he could see us off on the way back, us and a lot more people.
Just when we got onto the trawler, or what we would call a trawler, we went as quick as we could to get our head down because we were tired. And we got on where they keep the ropes up, what's known as the forecastle on the boat, right up in the bow, and we lay on the hawsers there, and one of the crew came along, and he had a cup of tea for both of us, huge mug of tea, and a very thick sandwich with dripping, with beef dripping from it, and oh, wasn't it wonderful? It was marvellous, that.
We shall fight on, unconquerable, until the curse of Hitler is lifted from the brows of men. We are sure that in the end, all will be well.
The memories of Manxmen who took part in the evacuations from Dunkirk. You heard the voices of Ernest Ackery, Jack Creer, Louis Bridson, Evan Gell, Charlie Crow, George Kane, and Bill Lister.
We got onto a train very quickly off when we were at Ramsgate, and we started a very, very slow journey right up through England, but going very, very slow. And it must have been a Saturday afternoon, because what surprised us, we were playing cricket, beautiful white cricket apparel, playing cricket. And we'd come from that, which we couldn't that couldn't sink in then.
John Moss with a special edition of Perspective, featuring memories of the Battle of Dunkirk. It was compiled in 2004 to mark the 64th anniversary of the battle. And you can listen back to that programme along with additional content from the Manx Radio archives. That's online at manxradio.com/portal.